Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick presentation with you on peat as another form of creating energy. So already we have looked at oil and gas, and we've looked at oil in Saudi Arabia and how successful they have been in creating energy and selling it, and it heats our homes and drives our cars. And we looked at gas in Ireland and Kinsale and in the Corrib gas field, and how we use that to heat up our homes and all the controversy it causes. And I suppose the next source we need to look at is peat, because peat is something that we've been using in Ireland for a long time to create energy, to create electricity, to heat our homes, etc. So I suppose we'll just go through this and see, hopefully you'll be okay with it. So peat is a natural resource. It's something that's naturally provided to us by nature. We basically dig it out of the ground. It's been used for centuries as a source of heat and energy in Ireland. Some of you may have still used turf in your fires at home. Maybe it's your grandparents that use it. So I suppose peat is just another word for turf. Where do we get it? We get it out of the bogs. Not all land in Ireland is bogland. I suppose bogland isn't the greatest in the sense that it's full of water, but you wouldn't really use it for farming, and you wouldn't use it to build houses or towns on. But we have discovered that we can dry out the turf in it, and we can use that turf for creating heat, because when you burn the turf or when you burn the peat, you create heat. So cutting turf is an extractive industry. Extractive means we extract it out of the ground, we dig it out, okay? So most bogs contain 95% water. So that's why when you're going to the bog for a day and you're standing the turf and turning it and bringing it home and bagging it, it's obviously better if you wear your wellies, because it's so wet there. It just absorbs the water. So that's why when you have to go and get the turf, you have to stand it and foot it and ray foot it to dry it out. Okay, so you can see the bank of the bog there, so you can see how deep down the turf can go. So it's pretty deep. So like if you had a little patch of a bog there and you're taking the turf out of it every year, you get a good few years out of it. So peat, what was it? Like, how was turf or peat formed? It was once plants or vegetation, such as mosses and shrubs, that just didn't fully decay. So think of a vegetation rotting and decaying. It's just that these didn't fully decay. It was just preserved. The water and everything combined and it preserved it. Okay, so now you're looking at a map of Ireland, and it's showing you the location of our bogs in Ireland. Okay, so you can see the browny colour bogs. The goldy brown colour bogs are our blanket bogs. They're not the greatest. They're very, very waterlogged. They're in high mountainous areas, hard to access, and they're very thin. Whereas the purpley coloured bogs are in the centre, in the Midlands. They're very, very deep. They are on flat land and they're good. Okay. So what do we use turf for? We use it for cooking and heating. Some of you or your grandparents might have a stove or a turf fire at home. And it heats up the homes. You might even cook the dinner on top of the stove or the cooker. So years and years ago, how they got the turf out of the bog was very, very hard labour. They used the shlán. And if you've never heard of this, ask your parents or grandparents. So the shlán was an old hand tool, and it cut the turf very, very slowly. It was like a knife basically for cutting the turf out of the bog. So it was very, very slow to literally use that shlán to dig the turf out of the bog. So it took a long time to exploit the peat. And exploit, it means use it and dig it out. You can see a picture of a family there, and they're literally digging out the peat with the shlán, and they're throwing it up to the others, and they'll put it up on the bank of the turf then of the bog to dry it. The turf then, when they had cut it and dried it in the bog, they brought it home by pony and cart. Nowadays you bring it home with the turf or with the tractor and trailer. It's a little bit faster nowadays to bring home the turf. I suppose we have our bogs where we'll say you and me go to the bog every summer and we dig out our peat out of our own bog. Whereas we have another company in Ireland called Na Móna, and they're responsible for exploiting peat in Ireland. So basically they sell peat products in Ireland. Whereas you and me just go to the bogs like this one and we dig out our peat and we bring it home for our own use in our own fire at home. Whereas there's a company in Ireland called Na Móna, and they exploit the peat, they dig it out and they sell it and they make money out of it. Okay, so they set up back in 1946, so they've been around for quite a long time. I suppose you're looking at like 70 years at this stage, over 70 years. So their job is to literally, they make money out of peat, to make money out of it. So they've bought up land, They own the bogs in the Midlands of Ireland and they sell the peat commercially. Now, they don't just sell sods of turf that we're familiar with. They sell loads of stuff like peat briquettes and everything. So they have actually sped up exploiting the bog, which means they've dug a load of the bogs out. They've actually used a load of them. They own 7% of bogland in Ireland. So like I said a while ago, you have two types of bogs in Ireland. You have blanket bogs and you have raised bogs. So I'll just remind you of them. The raised bogs are the better ones. They're flatter. They're up to 12 metres deep and there's a large amount of turf in them. So like they're deep, which means that you can exploit them and you can dig turf out of them for a longer period of time. The fact that they're flatter bogs means that it's easy to drive the machinery on and there's a lot of turf in them. So you can use them for a long time. So you can see that Na Móna, of course, would buy up the raised bogs. And there's some individual people then that own those raised bogs as well. But mostly, you know, a lot of them are owned by Na Móna because they're flat, they're large, easy to drive machinery on, and they're deeper and there's a lot of peat inside them. Whereas the other bogs are blanket bogs. They're very thin. They only go down really around 1.5 metres. They're in areas of Ireland by the coast, so coastal areas of Ireland where they get heavy rainfall coming in from the Atlantic, so they're severely waterlogged. And they're found in mountainous areas, so they're hard to reach. You do have a few, of course, individual people along the west coast of Ireland that get their peat out of there, but it takes a long time for the turf to dry and it's hard to get the machinery in and out of there. So Na Móna wouldn't have any interest in those kind of bogs, obviously. Okay, so again, there's your picture of your blanket bogs along the west coast of Ireland. Think the coast of Kerry, Cork, Galway. And then you have your raised bogs in the Midlands of Ireland that Na Móna like. Na Móna use the raised bogs. Why? Because they're deeper, they're flatter. We've said that already. Okay, so very quickly I'm just going to talk you through how Na Móna actually get the peat out of the bog, how they get the turf out of the bog. So it's 4 stages. Okay, so stage 1, they must prepare the bog. So when they go in with their machinery, what must they do to prepare that bog, that raised bog? Well, they use a ditcher to drain the bog. I said earlier that there's over 90% of water inside in bogs. Bogs contain a lot of water. You don't want the turf soaked with water because it wouldn't burn properly in the fire. It wouldn't work properly. So you want to drain as much water as you can. And obviously you don't want machinery sinking either inside there. So they use a machine called a ditcher to drain the bog. Then they come in and they get a grader machine to level the surface of the bog, make sure it's nice and flat. So they use a ditcher to drain all of the material out of all of the water out of the bog. And basically they dig like ditches along the side of the bog to drain all that excess water out of it. Then they use a grader machine to level the surface of the bog, make sure it's nice and flat for all the other machines to come in. And then they use a heavy tractor and that lays down railway tracks all, you know, from the bog out because they have to use railway tracks to transport the peat out of the bogs to like an electricity factory or a peat briquette factory or wherever they're taking the peat to. So when they're preparing the bog, they use a ditcher to drain the water out of the bog. They use a grader to level the surface of the bog, and they use a heavy tractor, and that lays down all of the railway tracks, which will later be used to transport the peat out. The second step that they must do is harvest the peat. Harvest the peat is, in basic terms, taking it out of the ground. Okay, so they use a miller machine, and that scrapes a thin layer of peat from the surface of the bog, and it tears it up into tiny fragments. So they're not really taking out big sods of turf like we would be. They're literally scraping the surface of the peat into tiny pieces, tiny fragments. Think of literally tiny fragments of turf. Then the harrow turns and dries the tiny fragments of peat, okay? Because it's still going to have a little bit of water in it. So the harrow turns and spins it and dries it. And then the ridger gathers all of the peat into ridges so that it's easy for them to collect it and put it into the turf trains. So in the second step of preparing the bog, they use a miller, which is a machine to scrape a thin layer of peat off the surface of the bog, and it tears it up into tiny fragments. Then the harrow is a machine that turns and dries the peat, and then the ridger is a machine that gathers all of the peat into ridges. Then they're ready to transport the peat out of the bog. So they use special turf trains to transport the peat out of the bog. Where do they bring it to? They bring it to ESB power stations So like now we don't really rely on that anymore to create electricity for all of our homes and schools. We use like gas and oil, and some wind energy in Ireland. But years ago we fully relied nearly on peat from our bogs, supplied to us by supplied to us by Board Na Móna. They brought the turf by turf trains to ESB power stations. So it actually happened that back then they located and they built the power stations, the electricity supply power stations, beside the bogs, because literally you transported the turf from the bog via turf train straight to the power station. So it made sense to locate it beside them. They also transported the turf by turf trains to briquette factories. Now, some of your parents might buy briquettes. It's convenient. They're about €4 or €5. You buy them in the petrol station or the supermarket, and they burn great heat inside in the fire. So people don't even realise that peat briquettes are actually turf. Okay, it's just that they scraped the peat from the surface of the bog, they turned and dried it, they gathered it into ridges, and they brought it to a factory which literally compacts the peat into peat briquettes. The last and final step is, what do they do with it using the processed peat? So all that peat that they gathered from the bog, what do they do with it? Well, one of the types of peat is called milled peat, and that's the one that I just told you that is that what they send to the power stations. So when they send that scrape peat or that milled peat from the bog to the power stations, they burn it to create electricity. That electricity is sent to our homes to power our homes and our schools. Milled peat is also used to make peat briquettes. So like I said to you a while ago, when the miller, which is the machine in the bog, scrapes the surface of the peat and breaks it up into tiny fragments, that's called milled peat. So that's either sent to a power station to create electricity, or it's sent to a peat briquette factory and makes briquettes for us. Okay, like you see in your petrol station or supermarkets. Moss peat is another type of peat that they sell. It's the lighter peat and it's found in the very, very top of the bog. And your parents will surely use moss peat before. It's used as a soil conditioner. If you want your soil to grow really, really good plants or crops, like add a bit of moss peat to it. Okay, so compost is what you might know it as. Okay, and the other final thing that the Board Na Móna sell then is sod peat. Not a whole pile of it. They would sell some sods of turf and sod peat to locals living near the Board Na Móna bogs, and those locals would buy it off them and they'd use it literally like you and I do to burn turf in the fire. So they're the 4 steps basically in exploiting the bogs. You basically prepare the bog, you dig out the peat, you transport it, and what do they sell it for? So I hope that helps. We'll leave it at that one for today.